My friends, we come into a sanctuary today. In your presence, Rabbi Karf's family, and by live stream, all those who join us around the city, around the country, and the world, to remember a man who was larger than this world, who filled our hearts and minds with so much that we can barely find the breath, let alone the words, to remember him. But we will do the very best that we can. And we know that he'll love us for it and forgive us for anything that we might have left out. There are many people who would otherwise fill this room, this sanctuary that holds 950 people and beyond its doors so many more. And while we would love to be hugged and surrounded and comforted by all of you and each of you, we know that you are there to remember with us those who stood with Sam Karf as leaders in this congregation. Rosalind Hyken, the current president of our congregation, Irving Stern, past president, Bruce Levy, Pat Polikoff, Bobby Lapin, Kevin Lewis, Joe Chesnick, Craig Lieberman, Sheldon Oster, Alan Gover, Stephen Block, Sylvia Wolf, Joyce Chesnick, Barry Margolis, Armin Shapiro, Arthur Schechter, Jerry Bass of blessed memory, Gloria Herman of blessed memory, David Toomim of blessed memory, Alan Rauch, Jack Lapin of blessed memory, Melvin Wolf of blessed memory, Alfred Friedlander of blessed memory. So many rabbis, cantors, who made their way with Rabbi Karf through these halls, down the aisle, to take their places on this bima, to preach, to sing, to teach, to guide, and to bless. Members of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the CCAR, his beloved alma mater, Harvard, Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, his colleagues in Naor, retired colleagues of the conference, his students and colleagues at Rice University, and of course all those who adored him at Congregation Beth Israel. Among us stand too the ranks of all who are blessed by him, held by him, and comforted by him. And though we can't be here in the way that we would like, our words and our songs will be a tribute to this man, this individual, this gift. And so as we prepare ourselves in our hearts and minds, one of the ways that we like to sing unto God is to remember the music that he inspired and welcomed here in Houston. You see, Debbie Friedman, who is not an unfamiliar name to us either, was one whom Sam found in Chicago. She came to Houston. Beth Israel commissioned the Youth Shall Dream Dreams for all our confirmation classes and years. When I hear that music, I still feel compelled to march down the aisle and take my place on the bima. But today our service, in memory of our beloved, will also be a tribute to the music he inspired and he loved so dearly. From generation to generation, the generation of rabbis has gone, but the generation of rabbis, teachers, and leaders he inspired continue to walk in his footsteps, though never to fill them completely, but each of us in our own ways to do what Sam taught us to do to the best of our ability. L'dor vador.
We continue now with the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a going, a growing, from stage to stage, from childhood to maturity, and youth to age, from innocence to awareness, and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again. From health to sickness, and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until, looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. But life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage, made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting.
Our dear Rabbi taught us well and knew for himself that through life we are known by many names. His family knew him by one, we by another, and through the course and journey of his days, he earned and accepted so many others. A beautiful poem by Zelda helps us to know this. In Hebrew, it's called L'chol ish yesh shem. Each man has a name. Each man has a name given by God and given by his parents. Each man has a name given by his stature and his smile and given by what he wears. Each man has a name given by the mountains and given by his walls. Each man has a name given by the stars and given by his neighbors. Each man has a name given by his sins and given by his longing. Each man has a name given by his enemies and given by his love. Each man has a name given by his celebrations and given by his work. Each man has a name given by the seasons and given by his blindness. Each man has a name given by the sea and given by his death. The psalmist is a great source of comfort to us. When the psalmist looked and asked, "What is the source of my help?" the psalmist found his answer, and so do we. From Psalm 121, I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. Rabbi Karf, Sam was moved by many readings, and he read a lot. He wrote so many poignant words, too. One of the readings that he always highlighted and aimed for us to read on Yom Kippur afternoon came from Gates of Repentance. We know it as the Red Book. And as we made our cues and prepared for services with him so many years ago, he would always be sure that we read on Yom Kippur afternoon this reading. For some reason that I've only come to begin to understand, it helped to answer some of the questions about his relationship with God and how we wrestle with what is, what ought to be, and God's place in all of it. It's not a flower, a mystery no flower can explain. Is not God the growing, the pattern with which has no end and is never quite the same? Is not God in the heart that sees it and weeps for beauty? Why then, God, the mystery that the bombs fall and the sprays kill and the flames rise and the children go up in smoke? Why is there still a flower to remind us of you? Why does the sun still burn to give us life? How do we still turn to you? Why cannot we help but turn to you? But why? Why do we turn to you so late? As Sam contemplated the answer to those questions for himself and with us in every brilliant word that he preached and taught to us, surely he also wrestled as many others did before him, and in his own way provided some new answers and insights for us. But even he could not escape the long trajectory of time that brought us back to our most important prophets and sages. Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, God has taken. Blessed be the name of God. Today we say, Adonai natan, God you have given. O God, you gave us a loved one who will surely not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts and souls. Adonai lakach, and yet, O God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and your love, as we say, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. Blessed be the name of God, now and forever. As even in these few moments we've grown a little more accustomed to the purpose of our being here, to the letting go that is inevitable at the end of the course of one's life, we hear ringing in our ears and in the music that we've sung. And God said to Abraham and Sarah, Lichi lach, go forth to a place that I will show you, a place that is intended for you not only in this life, but in the life of peace in eternity. Lichi lach.
To a land that I will show you. Lech lecha, to a place you do not know. Lech lech, on your journey I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. And I shall make your name great. Lech lecha, and all shall praise your name. Lech lech, to the place that I will show you. L'simchat chayim, l'simchat chayim, l'simchat chayim, lechilach. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. Lechilach.
In 1990, on the Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College, I entered a small room to meet a man whose reputation preceded him. His name was Rabbi Samuel E. Karf, then senior rabbi of Congregation Beth Israel and president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. He was there to interview new ordinees, young rabbis, to be his newest assistant rabbi. After 11 other interviews, he was the first rabbi who asked me plainly, "What does it mean to you to be a rabbi?" Our conversation began from there and unfolded into what would be years of shared association and friendship. But it was also a small glimpse into a man whose incisive intellect and enormous empathy invited you to join him where you needed to be too. A gadol, a giant in his generation and ours, Sam Karf entered the rabbinate in 1956 and quickly earned recognition for his excellence in the pulpit. In Hartford, Connecticut, Flint, Michigan, Sinai Temple in Chicago's Hyde Park, Sam made an indelible impression with his Friday messages and Sunday sermons. Reflections on current events by way of history and literature, and of course Torah and text, captivated his congregation and community students. Those who were his congregants still cherish years with him. In 1975, when he came to Congregation Beth Israel in Houston, Texas, it was a long way from his northern surroundings. But Sam and Joan, who preceded him in death, were convinced by Beth Israel leaders Alfred Friedlander and Melvin Wolf of blessed memory that Houston was a city of opportunity, and the temple, the oldest synagogue in Texas, organized in 1854, was ready for creativity and transformation. Years later, Sam would teach me that a congregation with history was one that had roots, stability, and vision. He and Joan and their 3 daughters, Amy, Rachel, and Liz, arrived in Houston to their new home ready to build a new future. Soon you'll hear Sam's daughters, Amy, Rachel, and Liz, and their grandson, Josh, who will speak for all 7 grandchildren, recount their relationship to their father and grandfather. What I can say is that Sam, whose life he shared with countless others outside the home, had in his heart a special place for his beloved Joan and his children and grandchildren, Josh, Ben, Emily, Jacob, Daniel, Zach, and Zoe, and 2 bonus grandchildren, Jacob's wife Leah and Josh's fiancée Sarah. Their home was a center for his renewal and nourishment, physically and emotionally. Sam has been asked how it is that his 3 daughters all live in Houston. He never failed to smile and explain that he enabled them to attend any university for undergraduate studies. But for graduate studies, he insisted on a Houston school. It was a small guarantee that they'd establish their professional work close to home. I hope you're taking notes. Sam and Joan cherish the bonus time with family here and also their own time as lifelong partners and soulmates. Upon Joan's death, Sam was alone for the first time in 57 years. His years with Joan were his greatest treasure, and she always held a unique place in his heart. Later, Sam was fortunate to know Valerie Barron, a widow and a friend of the family, who found with Sam a bond that awakened in them both a shared interest in worship at Beth Israel, outings to enjoy the arts, and hours to fill that were less empty and lonely. The family is grateful for Valerie's friendship, and as Sam said to me, Valerie, he felt blessed to have you in his life. Away from Houston, but never far from Sam's thoughts, was his sister Alana Cohn and her family, His cousin Asher Grun is a former president of the Supreme Court of Israel, and cousin Moshe Margalit, a gifted architect in Israel. Sam's mother Reba and father Louis, who preceded him in death, had profound influences on him. He is both his mother's and his father's son. In Houston, Rabbi Karf's contributions to this congregation were tremendous. No one will forget the days when sermons were in vogue. Sam's gift of oratory and brilliance from the pulpit held the attention of the congregation with a voice that some said was the voice of God. Did you know or do you remember that the Friday night service ended not with Kaddish, but with his sermon? He was able to make you feel that he was speaking just to you, and sometimes, even though I was always sitting behind him, I think it was true. It was his gift to us that we might leave the sanctuary blessed by his words and his hopes for a good week. One of Sam's transformative gifts to Beth Israel was the Schlenker School, a jewel in the crown of Reformed Jewish day schools. It was an odd partner in what had been a profoundly classical Reformed congregation. But Sam described his vision this way: Jewish children should be as proud to carry their Hebrew books as they are their science books. It was a simple principle that invited early opponents of the idea to see the wisdom, his wisdom, in his vision. 30 years later, it is thriving. He knew that the best guarantee for a Jewish future depended on well-rounded, well-educated Jewish children. Before Sam led others, he led himself through junctures of his life in the rabbinate. Writing in his book, Permission to Believe, he came to a deep and personal conclusion. He wrote, "I am of worth even though sometimes I mess up or fail, because I am created in the image of God. I have tasks to do. I should focus not on whether I will succeed or fail, but on doing the task I am intended to do with all my heart, as an offering to my Creator. I must believe that if I do all I can, God, the Redeemer and Helper, will somehow sustain me." You and I can hear his voice in what he wrote. In his words, we learn how to begin to lead by example. As Sam found his way in God's presence and with God's help, he did the same for us. His own illuminating spiritual moment shined on ours. Who wasn't moved by his instructive words of counsel? Who didn't feel transformed in his presence after words of validation? How many of us felt that we could face another day after loss or tragedy because Sam's empathy and compassion made it possible? Who didn't feel gratitude for God's gifts when Sam blessed us under the chuppah, holding our newborn, or at the Torah on Bar Bat Mitzvah? For Sam, these sacred times in sacred places were moments that reflected his deep inner spirituality. He wrestled with spirituality, but he found, as he would in Jewish texts known as Agadah, what he called a covenant grounded in an enduring tension between God's demanding justice and unconditional love. He was masterful at holding in his mind at once two competing ideas that offered insights into a controversy that needed resolution. He observed the tension everywhere in the universe, in large dilemmas and small differences. Judaism, he believed, and Reform Judaism especially, was uniquely prepared to provide structure and autonomy to answer moral and religious questions, and as he would say, for this time and this place. Agadah explained that God created this world with equal measures of justice and mercy. Thankfully for us, in Sam's presence, he tilted the world in favor of mercy. Aptly, one of his favorite stories from Agadah, which rabbis know so well, is the one about the king's diamond, which was marred by a long, thin scratch. Horrified by its imperfection, The king set out to find someone who would restore the diamond's perfection, and though many tried, it was a simple jeweler who saw at once that the long, thin scratch could be transformed into a beautiful rose. When it was presented to the king, the simple jeweler was handsomely rewarded for making even more beautiful the king's diamond. In Sam's hands, the simple story was a metaphor for life. You see, Sam wrote and taught about life's ambiguities, the gray places in life where binary choices and outcomes are beyond reach. Sam found these ambiguities a rich source of teachable moments. He dedicated himself to mining Jewish texts for ways and means to arrive at outcomes that reflected our covenantal relationship to God, who is just and merciful, and reflected the human condition as he encountered it in others. In his brilliance, he tapped Judaism's vast literature for perfect lessons, stories, and moral choices for us, while assuring us that guilt was not a prerequisite for redemption. Rather, Sam helped us find God's light that burned in each of us as he taught from Proverbs, the soul of each person is the light of God. He urged us in this way because he urged himself in the same way. Could we be as great as Sam Karpf? Could we grow to understand life the way he did? We could never be as great, and we could never understand life just as he did. But his gifts to us were his invitations to join him in trying to find the best in ourselves and with God's help. At the same time, Sam was remarkably accepting and respectful of others' faith journeys. When we served together on the board of the Institute for Spirituality and Health at the Texas Medical Center, the board considered changing its name from the Institute of Religion to something with greater inclusiveness. After much conversation, Sam took his turn to speak. With respect for others' comments, he chose his words carefully, and I remember he said, "We are all spiritual, and the deepest expression of that spirituality is participation in one's own religion." He led us to conclude that the Institute was about providing a unique center where spiritual people could engage religion for meaning in the context of medical health and well-being. Sam's community outreach is well known. He joined Reverend Bill Lawson and Archbishop Joseph Fiorenza in Houston to accomplish major policy changes in the name of homelessness, public justice, equality, and in a word, humanity. 3 pillars of faith. They were commonly known as the 3 amigos. They were a force. At one of our regular lunches, Sam told me that he was, even after all these years, still impressed by what the 3 of them could do and which none of them could do or accomplish alone. He told me that if he had walked into the mayor's office or the district attorney's office and spoke on his agenda, he wouldn't have been taken seriously unless the 3 amigos took their seats together. Honestly, who would toy with such heavenly fire? Behind their force for good, they shared a deep and abiding friendship. The death of their rabbi friend was felt profoundly. In words by Reverend Lawson, on behalf of himself and Archbishop Fiorenza, he writes, "This is a word or two from the amigos about Rabbi Sam Karpf. Most of the rest of Houston knows him as Rabbi Emeritus of Congregation Beth Israel, but his family knows him as Daddy or Granddaddy. Archbishop Joseph Fiorenza and I know him as Sam, and he knew us as Joe and Bill. All of us knew him as a giant of a man, but one whose humility and gentleness would shock you if you knew the greatness of the character hid beneath that humility and greatness. But now you have seen enough of the media coverage to know that Rabbi Samuel Karpf made a significant impact on Houston, Had he made no more of an impression than to be called to the rabbinate of the oldest and probably the largest Reformed congregation in Texas, that alone would have been enough. But Sam made considerably more of an impression than that. He came to Houston with degrees from Harvard and Hebrew Union College, with a commission from the United States Air Force chaplaincy, and with experience with huge congregations in Chicago. Rabbi Karf had all the ingredients to look down his nose at the underclass, but he didn't have the inclination. He was by nature sensitive to the vulnerable and to the neglected. So when Archbishop Joe and I thought about how we would not remember Sam being given awards, although he received many for his excellence in teaching at Rice University and the University of Texas School of Health, but how he would join Joe and Bill out of suit or collar or tie under the bridge with the homeless, or risk being arrested and jailed as nameless vagrants. Does that sound like a Harvard degree or appointment by the Pope to the position of Archbishop? This is the kind of human being we are memorializing today. Rabbi Samuel E. Karf has been called home to God. We should weep a little for him, pray for his family, but we should not dissolve in grief. We have immense reason to thank God that he sent such a man among us as the Rabbi Samuel Karf to improve our communities and to make our world so much better. Reverend Lawson and Archbishop Fiorenza, on behalf of Congregation Beth Israel and his family, and in memory of your dear friend in faith, may God bless you with good health and well-being. The city won't be the same without the three amigos, but if you would indulge us with the two amigos, we would all feel much better about the future. Today, the three amigos are honored on the Plaza of Respect at Interfaith Ministries of Greater Houston. Likewise, Rabbi Karf was an original member of ADL's Coalition of Respect. In his role on the coalition, he championed the cause of ADL and personally participated in pulpit exchanges. His vision taught us about God's love for all God's children, and in Greater Houston, how to accept that there are ways to speak of God without failing to honor one's own relationship to God. Sam also had a special ability to make an indelible impression in intimate places where souls needed mending. To a young man named Jeremy Tucker, Sam was his rabbi, constant supporter, source of inner strength, and loving friend. At age 30, when Jeremy, a brilliant young medical student, was treated for a brain tumor that upended his prospects as a doctor and the life he imagined living, Sam stepped in. He began visiting with Jeremy every Sunday to give him some spiritual comfort and ways to discover a new and meaningful life outside the world of medicine. The bond that developed gave Jeremy some inner peace and the strength to go on. In one visit, Jeremy and Rabbi discussed a portion of the Torah. Jeremy's natural gift to question and seek meaning had not been affected, and Rabbi Karf was naturally taken aback by his forthrightness. In a call to Jeremy's father, Rabbi Karf said that after many years in the rabbinate, he was unaccustomed to being challenged by someone with less experience in his field. What a gift it was that Jeremy, despite all his current challenges, could wrestle with subjects that were for Rabbi Karf his life's ambition. Jeremy learned from Sam and later observed, "We are all handicapped. Only the nature of our disabilities distinguishes us one from one another." Jeremy loved being Jewish, and he was proud to be a Jew. After Sam retired from Beth Israel in 1999, he laid the groundwork for what would come next. He applied his deep commitment to the covenantal relationship between God and man and woman in the place where he felt the human condition called out for help. At the Texas Medical Center, he founded the Health and Human Spirit program at UT's McGovern Center. Sam researched and implemented what is known as the Sacred Vocation program. In brief, It turned the paradigm of patient care upside down. To him, he believed that every person's role or task was a sacred vocation that began not with the patient, but with the persons who contributed to the patient's well-being. Imagine the sacred work done by the person who cleaned the floor or the bedpan in the patient's room. And imagine the soul-stirring effect on that person who felt that he or she was part of that life-saving team. No doubt drawing from Torah, in which everyone from tribal head to woodchopper and water drawer was part of God's covenant. Sam taught health service workers and providers to see themselves as doing sacred work. Staff morale rose and patient outcomes improved. The curriculum he carefully researched, wrote, and taught was adopted by medical schools and teaching hospitals across the country. My friends, though I am here first to comfort Rabbi Karf's family and my congregational family, whom I adore, I am also, though a far second, but nonetheless a mourner today. Sam and I shared a bond. It was founded on a shared outlook on Judaism and the role of a rabbi, a shared love for this congregation and commitment to the city of Houston, and a sense of humor that, while mostly held in check, found its way out more than a few times. He told me that he was grateful that Beth Israel was flourishing, to use his word, to know that he was proud of me even in the slightest meant more than you can know. As we recall our times with our rabbi and friend on the tennis court, at the dinner table, at Rosh Hashanah lunch and Yom Kippur breakfast, hearing his favorite children's story, being his neighbor on Paisley or Palmetto, receiving his blessing with his sacred hands, hearing him on Coda on Sunday morning, or the myriad ways he touched our life, we have all had a gift that cannot be recast or remade. His rabbinate became our salvation and our help. His understandings became our lessons. His deeds became model examples of what to do and how to do it. But I will tell you this, in his greatness was profound humility and authenticity. When he was graciously and generously introduced to speak at a program, he often began by saying, "God, forgive my host for his gross exaggerations, and God, forgive me for enjoying them." At the end of Sam's memoir, he wrote, "For persons of religious faith, our ultimate source of meaning is that we live in the presence of our Creator, who has made known to us the way we should live, who is active in our lives and in the world to fulfill the divine dream for creation, and who will be with us and embrace us when we have crossed the threshold from life on earth to eternity." For a man of Sam Karf's deeds, goodness, wisdom, and love, God was surely with him to embrace him when he crossed the threshold from life on earth to eternity. Sam Karf died on the Sabbath, a day of peace which holds in itself a promise of everlasting peace. Zichrono livracha, may the everlasting peace that our beloved now knows be a sacred gift for a life well lived. Amen. There are so many ways that all of us will remember our beloved Rabbi Karf. There's nothing more precious than the memories of his family. I'd like to call now on his daughter, Rachel.
After crafting a 4-page obituary about our father, You might think that we have nothing left to say, but you'd be wrong. Most of you knew Rabbi Karf. Many of you knew Sam Karf, but we knew Dad and Grandpa Sam. What was extraordinary about Dad is that his greatness in the world and his greatness as a father matched. Neither eclipsed the other. Yes, sacrifices were made, but they were made thoughtfully and intentionally. And I think it is not coincidence that Dad always told the story of how I was born on his birthday, and it was the same moment that one of the founding members of his then synagogue passed away, and he had to write a eulogy. So Mom was giving birth, Dad was writing a eulogy. Mom, in their partnership, took on the lion's share of day-to-day parenting responsibilities so that Dad could be the kind of rabbi he needed to be: accessible, empathic, responsive, and inspiring. But he tried to balance that loss of time and focus in other ways. When we were very young, he created dates with Dad, special time alone with him at the event or location of our choosing. I almost always chose Broadway musicals. As soon as a new touring company scheduled a stop in Chicago, we'd plan our date. I remember seeing Oklahoma with John Davidson and a very young David Copperfield's live magic show. We also saw many films together on daddy-daughter dates. The most memorable was Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles. I will never forget how Dad squirmed in his seat when I innocently but loudly asked him what a schlong was. When I was older and missed school because I wasn't feeling well, there was a hidden bonus to being home alone. Dad would come home at lunch to check up on me, and he would bring gifts from Walgreens with him: candy, fashion magazines, and drugstore perfume. I felt so incredibly loved. The other way that our father strove to balance his family life with his rabbinate was to retreat to our little cottage on Lake Charlevoix each summer. For many years, way before the invention of cell phones, we did not even have a landline in the cottage, and there was never a TV. My parents had set up an elaborate way to be contacted in case of dire emergencies, but other than that, he was all ours. Dad spent every morning biking into town and camping out in an empty classroom at the high school to study and write, but the afternoons and weekends were family time. We would play tennis and then go to the A&W drive-thru for a frosty mug of root beer. Other days we would visit Mrs. Rowe's garden, and she would teach us how to tease a carrot out of the soil by gently tugging at the roots. Dad had a real appreciation for nature and a love of God's bounty. Whether he was taking us to watch the sunset over Lake Michigan or sharing a perfect tomato, he savored those small moments with immense gratitude. Those were wonderful family times, and they compensated for the many hours Dad was away from us during the year, tending to the needs of his congregational flock. I knew Dad as a father and grandfather, and I saw the wonderful husband he was to Mom, but he was also an amazing big brother to his sister Alana. As the oldest of 3 girls, I always secretly wanted a big brother. Looking back now, I'm sure it was because Dad was such a wonderful brother to his sister. Though they were different in many ways, they were both members of a mutual admiration society. From the day she was born, when he was 8, he made it his mission to protect her. My sisters and I are so grateful that Dad was able to attend the lovely 80th birthday celebration that Alana's son David and his family hosted for her last December in California before the world separated us all. He was so proud to toast his beautiful sister Alana on her special day. Dad was also proud of his role as a grandfather. When Josh was born, he ushered Mom and Dad into the world of grandparenthood, a world I'm eager to visit. And I can still clearly see the way Dad's eyes smiled when he held Josh in his arms for the first time. Being first, I know since I was 2, comes with certain privileges, and Josh had a very special bond with his grandparents. Then Ben came along, and as he grew, it became clear that he, like Dad, had the unique ability to feel love deeply and express it easily. Dad loved seeing that attribute mirrored in his grandson. And finally, Emily showed up to shatter the all-boys club and become the first granddaughter paving the way for Zoe. Dad was surprised and moved when Emily chose to make Israel, the land of his parents and grandparents, her home. She told me recently that even at 88, his Hebrew was still better than hers. Obviously, we cannot share all of our special memories as much as we might want to, but sometimes the most seemingly insignificant moments had lasting impact. I remember a family road trip when the 3 girls were crammed grumpily into the back seat of a not very large sedan. Dad pulled into the toll booth to pay the toll. The toll booth operator, a woman in her 50s or 60s, smiled at Dad and said, "How are you doing, sir? Are you having a good day?" Dad smiled back at her as he handed over the coins and said, "I was, but you just made it even better. I can tell you take a lot of pride in the work you do here, and it shows." That's all he said, but I filed it away as an important life lesson. While young Rachel could not begin to imagine showing up to a toll booth each day and taking tolls, I understood that the operator's ability to transform that experience for her customers allowed her to find meaning in the experience of her own life as well. Dad told me once that no eulogy was complete without an acknowledgement of the person's flaws. He told me that since no human being is perfect, mourners are unable to recognize the person they've lost if all of their warts are whitewashed. So because I know he would want me to tell the whole truth, I will tell you the 2 things that kept Dad from complete perfection. The first was his utter and total ineptitude with all things mechanical. And when I say mechanical, I'm including a vast list of things from fixing a toilet to dealing with computers or TV remotes to putting anything together. If you knew how to do any of those things yourself, Dad marveled at your talent. The fact that I can somewhat navigate the ins and outs of day-to-day computer tasks made Dad erroneously put me in the same league with Steve Jobs. Sam Karf was not a handy man, but Sam Karf could call a handyman or woman. That's imperfection number 1. Imperfection number 2 was Dad's ability to lose anything, anywhere, over and over and over again. We called him the absent-minded professor. He had to constantly be reminded to take his coat, hat, umbrella, fill in the blank. Once, after playing tennis with Rabbi Yaskowitz, he and Herb stood by their cars discussing their upcoming weeks before getting into their separate vehicles and driving away. About halfway home, Dad realized that his tennis racket was not in the car. That was when it dawned on him that he had put it on the roof of the car but forgotten to retrieve it. About a year after Mom died, Dad realized that it was time to give up their home and move into a senior living facility. Dad had an unusual gift for recognizing and accepting life's stages, even the most difficult ones. I have decided that he was either the world's most idealistic realist or its most realistic idealist. My sisters and I hired a lovely woman to replicate the warmth and charm of their home in his new apartment, down to the tiniest detail. On move-in day, my sisters and I assisted the designer and her team in setting up the apartment perfectly. Every sock was in the sock drawer. Food was in the fridge. That night, I drove Dad over to see it for the first time and to spend the first night in his new place. It was a little tense as we drove. I could sense his unease. I teased him that only kings and heads of state have this kind of royal hands-off moving experience. As the car filled with the sound of our laughter, the tension seemed to dissipate. When we walked into his new apartment, Dad was visibly moved. He walked from room to room, inspecting our handiwork, noticing the paintings arranged on the wall just as they'd been hanging in their home. He walked into his study and saw all his books lovingly placed on the new built-in shelves especially created for this purpose. He articulated how incredibly grateful he felt that we had made this move so easy for him. After lighting Shabbat candles using the candlesticks that he and Mom had always used, we went downstairs to the main dining hall to have dinner. As we were sitting there, I told him that I was starting to feel nervous about leaving him there. I said that it felt like all the times I'd dropped kids off at camp or college, just as he and Mom had done so many times for me and my sisters. Actually, Dad, I said, I always hated camp, and I called you in the middle of the night to come back and get me. So if you don't want to stay here, you can call me in the middle of the night tonight. It's only fair. He laughed so hard at that image, and his eyebrows bounced around as they always did when he was really amused. He reassured me that he would be fine, but he also modeled that humor always greases the wheels when we are stuck in life's slushy parts. In these last few years, my sisters and I have circled around Dad, making sure that he had everything he needed. We each took different responsibilities and times. My slot was Sunday night, and I would pick Dad up and take him to Seasons 52 for dinner. During many of these dinners, I brought a special journal and asked him to respond to a question I had written earlier as I hurriedly scribbled down what he said. He never had nor needed any advance warning. Sam Carf off the cuff always managed to sound carefully thought out and eloquently crafted. Topics ranged from what's the most important quality to look for in a mate to what happens to us when we die. The mate question was important because I have never experienced nor witnessed another relationship like my parents. They connected on every level. I have fond memories of her impishly perching on his lap, and other memories of her stretched out on the carpet listening intently as he read her the first draft of his high holiday sermon. Theirs was a partnership of equals, though their roles were clearly defined. They complemented each other perfectly. She added spice and lightness to his tendency to be serious, and he was the calm rock that comforted her during sleepless nights of worry. Even as a child, I knew that they both adored each other and supported each other. As far as what happens to us when we die, well, let me allow Dad to tell you what he said in his own words on Sunday night, January 13, 2019. It is an ultimate mystery, and the details we cannot know. Death does not have the last word in a world created and governed by God. I view death as a return to the source of our being, a return to God. It is our soul, the part of us that is most connected to God. How we live our lives affects the size of our soul. The more meaningful, the more loving, etc., the greater the soul. Dad's soul was enormous. I imagine God having a staff meeting this morning and rallying his troops. Folks, we have a big one coming in, huge. Let's make sure we are prepared. We need all hands on deck. Open the gates extra wide. We need the full red carpet treatment, all the bells and whistles. Sam Carf is coming home.
This is always hard coming after you, Rachel. Ever since I was young, people would ask, what is it like to have Rabbi Carf as a father? My answer was always the same. As great as he is as a rabbi, he is an even better dad. When we were little, we always knew that, to a certain extent, we were sharing Dad with the congregation. But we never felt cheated. We never felt like we got the short end of the stick. Instead, we felt really lucky. Our family life worked in part because we had Mom, who was larger than life, who filled our lives with laughter and structure and nourished us with attention. As Rachel so eloquently said, our time in Charlevoix, Michigan was also responsible for the balance in our home life. Those were magical summers. And while I am sure there were tensions in that cabin from time to time, after all, there were 3 girls, Mom and Dad, and count them, 1 bathroom. My Charlevoix memories are as happy as any child could ever want. My relationship with Dad was simple. There was nothing strained or complicated. Sometimes Dad would talk about when I was a baby. And he would come home from temple at the end of the day. With 2 little ones at home, Mom was eager to hand me over to Dad so she could take care of Rachel. But, as the story goes, every time Mom gave me to Dad, I burst out crying. Dad would tell me that story often and smile and quickly add, "But you made it up to me in spades as soon as you could talk." Growing up, Dad would often sing a song to me. It was an old Dean Martin song. The main verse was, "Once in love with Amy, always in love with Amy." About a week ago, I found that song on YouTube, and I played it for Dad as he sang along. Dad was effusive with his love for us, never shaming or harsh. That is not to say that we were angels who did not need to be disciplined. It just means that he left that to Mom. Mom and Dad were a remarkable team, and they gave us the gift, the true gift, of growing up with parents who were openly affectionate and adoring of one another. After Mom died, and I was cleaning out her desk, I found a birthday card he had given her just a few years before. Because Dad had terrible handwriting, he typed out a message and placed it in the card. It was a love letter, in the truest sense of those words. Dad's voice is something we will all miss terribly. From the pulpit, that voice had the power to move you and cause you to re-examine parts of your life. But for us, his voice had even more meaning. I remember a time when I had just given birth to Jacob and had gotten up early to nurse him. When I turned on the radio, I heard Dad's voice, and I felt this calm come over me. He was giving one of his Sunday radio sermons. Only this time, incredibly, it was about the joy of being a grandfather again, and what a blessing it was to welcome a new soul into our family. Afterwards, I called Dad. I told him about this coincidence, that Jacob woke up just in time for me to hear that Sunday morning program and to hear his sermon on the radio. Dad responded with a common refrain: "Coincidences are just God's way of staying anonymous." Dad took to being a grandfather naturally. He got immense joy from sharing the things that they loved with them. He came to school functions and sporting events. Baseball games were his favorite. Dad was a wonderful father-in-law to my husband, Amir, and always made it known how much he loved and respected him. Dad was the most disciplined person I've ever met. One of the many examples was his morning exercise routine. After having back problems probably 40 years ago, Dad was given exercises to do from his doctor, which he did every morning, even on vacation. I remember when Dad and Mom took Liz's daughter Zoe and our son Daniel to Disney World, a tradition for each grandchild when he or she turned 6. Dad and Daniel shared a room. When Daniel returned home from the trip, it was clear that he was more enamored with watching Grandpa do his exercises on the hotel room floor every morning at 6 a.m. than he was with many of the rides at Disney World. Daniel gets his sense of discipline from his grandfather. There were times when Dad's role as a rabbi coincided with life cycle events for our family, something we all cherished. I remember Dad walking me down the aisle as I married my beloved husband, Amir, and then literally turning around and taking on the role of the rabbi who married us. Just this past February, Dad was able to give Jacob and his beautiful bride Leah the priestly benediction at their wedding. I know how much it meant to both of them that Dad was able to participate. While Dad was already failing somewhat, his beautiful voice could be heard throughout the room, and everyone was moved. Dad was the least judgmental person I've ever known. He understood that we as humans are flawed, and he was quick to point out his own imperfections. He was able to see both sides of an issue. He used to talk about seeing the gray in the world. He tried to get us to see things that way too. During confirmation in 10th grade, Dad taught a class on the Jewish view of current topics. One evening, as we were driving to temple, he told me that he was going to ask 2 students to debate the issue of abortion. He wanted to give me the heads up that he was going to call upon me to speak against a woman's right to choose. I told him I wanted to take the other side, which matched my own opinion. He said he knew that, but he wanted me to be able to understand the other perspective, even when it might seem difficult for me to do. It was an extraordinary lesson, and one that has stayed with me my whole life. There was a part of Dad, to be honest, a big part, that seemed like Superman to me. There was nothing he couldn't do, except for, as Rachel noted, anything mechanical or electrical. One story sticks in my mind. I was 16 and swimming in the pool with a friend. While swimming, my friend had a seizure, a serious one. As she was on her way to the hospital, I called Dad at the temple to tell him what happened. Dad asked if I needed him to come home, and I said I did. What I remember next is going to my room, shutting my door, and crying on my bed. In what felt literally like seconds, Dad was on my bed, reaching out to hold me. I was startled at first because he got home so quickly, thinking to myself that he truly did have superpowers, because he must have flown home to be with me. Dad knew that his strong arms, more than his words, were what I needed most at that moment. Well, the list of things I learned from my father is truly endless. One of the greatest lessons is that he taught us how to grow old gracefully, how to continually be thankful for your blessings, even when you have lost some. And for him, the greatest loss was losing Mom. Dad once told me that life was a book with many chapters, and he always felt ready to move on to the next one. As he was getting to the last chapter of his life, he prepared himself and us for the end of his time on earth. When the 3 of us visited with Dad on Father's Day, socially distant, he spent almost the entire time telling us how he and Mom could not have been more proud of the women we had become and how much he loved us. While he had said those words to us before, you could tell it was important to him to say those words at that moment. He said that he was grateful for the life he led. And he told us that when his time came, he would not feel cheated. With those powerful words, Dad prepared us to say goodbye. So, Dad, I want to say goodbye. Tell you that I will always love you.
This past Saturday, August 15th,
my sisters and I lost our amazing father, who was one of the most extraordinary human beings one could ever know. Our children lost their beloved grandfather, with whom they shared so many precious moments. Dad lived an exemplary life and was someone who not only talked the talk, but truly walked the walk in absolutely every aspect of his life. As a child, I watched with wonder as he stood looking out the window of his study, reciting his morning prayers. Or during our summers in Charlevoix, I'd wake up to find him standing by the water's edge with sacred prayer book in hand. Sabbath rituals were very special in our home. As young children, my sisters and I would line up in single file at my father's end of the Sabbath table to receive the special blessing. As he cupped his hands over our head, he recited the sacred and very soothing words, which began, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. In addition to our Sabbaths together, I have so many wonderful memories of life with Dad. Though his profession required so much time and energy, and he was often consumed with work, from sermon writing, officiating at all different life cycle events, visiting congregants in the hospital, to private counseling with those in need, he always managed to make time for his beloved wife and his 3 girls. We had what were called dates with Dad, which was precious individual time we each got with him. I have wonderful memories of living in Chicago, riding around Lake Michigan on the back of his bike, going to Lincoln Park Zoo, attending a baseball game, or going to see Peter Sellers in the Pink Panther movies, one of our favorites. In Houston, from age 10 till I left for college, it was movies, tennis, or a favorite Chinese restaurant. But regardless of the activity, it was always very treasured time alone with Dad. My dad's nickname for me was Shev, which was short for Elisheva, my Hebrew name. In addition to our dates with Dad, my sisters and I enjoyed wonderful summer months of uninterrupted time in Charlevoix. We devoured that time with both our parents in that sacred place we all loved so much. And once I had children of my own, they too enjoyed so many precious summers staying in our family cottage with my parents. It was so special for Zach and Zoe to be with their grandpa, and grandma too, of course, in such a beautiful setting with everyone feeling so relaxed and happy. Those are memories we will always treasure. As Zach got older, he and Dad enjoyed many long walks and talks, and Dad used to describe Zach as a true mensch. Dad was incredibly happy and proud when Zoe began teaching at the Schlenker school that he established. And when he came to read a story to her class, he relished seeing how much she was adored by both the students and the staff. The commandment to honor your father and mother was definitely one of the easiest for my sisters and me. We always said we hit the jackpot in the parent department, and anyone who knew our parents knew that that was no exaggeration. We truly have been incredibly blessed beyond measure. We had such enormous respect for both of our parents and wanted very much to make them proud. One day, many, many years ago, in our beloved Charlevoix, the 3 of us young girls were riding in the car with our dad when he had just received the names of 2 potential tennis partners. Being in the car and not having any cell phones at that time, Dad very much needed to rely on our memory. So he said to us all, "Girls, no matter what you do not forget these 2 names, Bill Strang and Jim Urich." This story became a running joke in our family, and one my dad found particularly amusing, because he never ended up meeting those 2 gentlemen, but his 3 daughters have remembered their names for our entire lives. Just a very small example of the tremendous respect and admiration we had for our dad. When he spoke, we listened, and if we could be of help to him, we jumped at the chance. In a conversation with my dad over a year ago, I was asking him a lot of different questions about his life and his work, and I took some notes. This is one of the many great things he said.
Some of the greatest moments in my rabbinate were not my high-profile encounters where I may have spoken at the invocation of a president or presented in front of high society or other distinguished persons or received great honors. They were one-on-one encounters with another human being who had a crisis of meaning. By your caring and your love, you have the power to help them recover that precious gift of meaning. Dad truly believed that each of us is called to use our unique gifts and talents to illuminate the darkness in our world. He said at many different times and in many different ways that when we use our gifts to do God's work in that corner of the world entrusted to our care, we experience the purpose for which we were created and fulfill the deepest meaning of our lives. Dad knew that he had found that in his life's work, and that became the title of his memoir, For This You Were Created. Dad also believed that in life one can always find teachable moments, whether we're parents, rabbis, or just plain human beings trying to be the best version of ourselves. We all have opportunities to affect the lives of others. Martin Buber was one of my father's most beloved teachers and mentors, one whom he never met, but knew and admired through his writings. Buber was famous for writing about two kinds of interactions, the I-it and I-thou. The most sacred encounters are the I-thou encounters, when we are being fully present and responding to people and the events of our everyday life with the fullness of our being. This is a quote that Dad used to describe Buber, which I believe most accurately describes my father. To the end of his days, he taught and fully embodied that openness, that readiness for true relations with other persons and with God, which is the most precious hallmark of our humanity. While Dad talked often about the blessings of a great teacher, I was fortunate enough to have been raised by mine. There is no doubt that my choice of profession as a psychotherapist was greatly influenced by my relationship with my father. I was so moved seeing and experiencing the integral role he played in people's lives as a source of great comfort and healing. One special memory I have with regard to our respective vocations was many years ago when Dad gave a talk at a local church. He called me after that speaking engagement to tell me how proud he was when one of the congregants came up to him afterwards and told him that she was one of my clients and that she could tell the apple didn't fall far from the tree. My entire life, I have been so proud to have so many people come up to me and tell me how much my dad has meant in their lives. So this was particularly special for my dad and me to have this happen in reverse. There were a few other times through the years when Dad would tell me that someone shared with him that I had been a source of healing for them, and although those encounters paled in comparison to how often I would hear about him, he never failed to tell me how proud it made him feel. My dad and I also attended together as often as we could the annual Psychotherapy and Faith Conference sponsored by the Institute for Spirituality and Health. More than a few times, Dad was one of the speakers, which always gave me tremendous pride. I loved sharing that conference space with him and our discussions afterwards. He truly was the most loving and supportive father a girl could ever want or need. The love he had for all of us was always spoken and felt, and for that and so much more, I'll be forever grateful. As hard as it is to imagine this life without either of our parents in it, with faith, our wonderful children, loved ones, and friends, we can carry this grief together, and we can continue to find joy and meaning in our lives. It gives me comfort to believe that he and his beloved, our darling mother, are once again in each other's arms. Dad, just as you have blessed us so many times, this blessing is for you. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Yer Adonai panav elecha v'yikonecha. May God's light shine upon you and be good to you. Yisad Adonai panav elecha v'yasem laha shalom. May God bless you with love and peace. Rest in peace, my precious father. I will love you forever.
It would usually go something like this. Rabbi Karf, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my family and I just wanted to say a quick hello and to pay our respects. I don't know if you remember me, I'm insert name. And you officiated my wedding 20 years ago, provided counsel to my dying parent, presided over my child's bris, were there for me during a time when I really needed a friend. As you can imagine, the list goes on. Without hesitation, he remembered their name, their story, and would ask a specific question to demonstrate the same. Those moments, which occurred practically everywhere we went, always left me in awe. And so while he somehow managed to show me and all of his grandchildren, Ben, Emily, Jacob, Daniel, Zach, and Zoe, that we were incredibly important to him, he took us on trips to Disney, attended our sporting events and school plays, played his very particular version of hide and seek, visited us when we moved out of Houston, regularly championed our pursuits, and often called just to check in. It was understood to us at a young age that Grandpa was not ours alone. And yet something about that made our relationship with him all the more special. As such, there are a few things I can tell you about our grandpa that you do not already know. His resume would make a recruiter's head spin. He shared himself openly and without condition. His kindness was unparalleled. His love without limits. His spirituality ever present. But here's a story you likely haven't heard. As many of you know, one of Grandpa's favorite places in the world was Charlevoix, Michigan. It was there where he would spend his summers reading, writing, and recharging his soul. On occasion, I, along with my siblings or cousins, would join him. One particular summer, I must have been no older than 10, I decided to borrow his rowboat without asking, of course, and proceeded to drag it, along with my younger brother Ben, into the water in pursuit of a quest unknown. I will never forget the fear I felt when I realized while on my way that no one knew we had left and that this boat was far too heavy for Ben and me to row back alone. I was fairly certain we were lost at sea. And, just like that, I saw Grandpa off in the distance. To my 10-year-old self, it felt like divine intervention. He borrowed his neighbor's canoe, and within a brief period of time it caught up to us, tied our boat to his, and began rowing us both back to shore. That then embarrassing moment showed me a few things. First, the power of humility. I was not as strong as I thought I was, and Grandpa didn't make me feel bad for that. Instead, he offered a warm smile and gratitude that we were all okay. Second, no matter how far we had wandered, Grandpa was always there, as he would continue to be throughout our lives, ready to guide us back to shore. Third, in addition to his many other strengths, my grandpa was actually a quite talented oarsman. I spoke with Grandpa last week. This time I called just to check in. I asked him, as I have many times before, for the secret to living a life as rich and fulfilling as his. Consistent as always, he said there are two incredibly important choices we need to make in life: at which point I smiled, knowing I'd heard this before. The first, he said, is who we choose to walk through life with. 57 years of walking alongside and awfully playfully chasing after my grandmother Joan led to a life of incredible fulfillment. The second secret, he said, is how we choose to spend our God-given gifts. I'm certain we can all agree that for this, Sam Karpf was created. As I stand here today, I feel sad but not confused, for his was not a life cut short. Instead, I stand here with immense pride. Bravo to you, Grandpa. You were centered, humble, thoughtful, profound, and compassionate to the end. You showed us what it means to be a leader. To call you our grandfather was a stroke of luck and a responsibility we'll carry with us from now until forever. No eulogy can encapsulate the impact you have had on this world or the magnitude of your legacy. And while your shoes are too big for us to fill individually, we will do our best to fill them as a team. On behalf of me, Ben, Emily, Jacob, Daniel, Zach, and Zoe, we love you infinitely. Rest in peace.
To look around this sanctuary now and to know that so many have appreciated the dear words and prayers and remembrances that we've all come to share. Helps all of us to know that there are, as I often teach, two kinds of tears, our tradition tells us. Dema'ot shel ashan, the tears of smoke that come down our eyes and faces, that sting our eyes because the loss is real and it hurts and we know it. But also dema'ot shel perot, the tears of fruit that we cry because the laughter, the love, and the faith continues. And even as you've helped us to remember through some laughter, those tears, as your father taught us, is about the qualities of life that are always balanced. So as we remember the peace that he granted us in his lifetime, so should we also embrace and hope that we will find peace too in our days as we remember him. Shalom Rav is a beautiful way to remember that God is the great source of all peace. And when we hear the familiar words and the familiar melody, we can find some rest and peace in our heart and our souls on this day.
Shalom Rav Israel Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Israel Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata melech Adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Israel Amcha Tasim Leolam. עולמך תשים לעולם, תשים לעולם, תשים לעולם.
O God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life and the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures, as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and your glory. As we prepare for El Malay Rachamim, a prayer of God's compassion, not only do we prepare to ask God to be compassionate to our beloved, but also to acknowledge on the Hebrew calendar that this day is the Yortzeit anniversary of your beloved mother and his beloved wife, Joan. Please rise.
El Malay Rachamim shochin b'marumim hametzim menocha nechona tachat kanfi hashechina im kedoshim udurim kizor harakei mazhirim et nishmat Shmuel Egal shalach leolamo Barachamim yastireu b'siter knafav leolamim bitzror achim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to our beloved Samuel Karf, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Private family interment follows immediately as we make our way from the sanctuary. And while those who are listening, I'd like to share with you that we will on Friday night at 6:30 p.m. in the sanctuary here by live stream memorialize the name of our beloved once more. And a Shiva Minyan will be held by Zoom at 6:30 p.m. this evening. And for the Zoom link, please be in touch with the congregation or in other places where we have published it. On behalf of Rabbi Scott, cantor trumpeter, Rabbi Sadeloff, and all of us here, we thank those who joined us for being with us today, and we wish for you that you'll carry with you in your heart and soul all that you do remember and cherish about our beloved, our Sam, our rabbi, our friend. Amen. This concludes our service.